Welcome to the Pharma Source podcast. Today we've invited Dr. Franziskus Kath to speak about the benefits and challenges of digital transformation in healthcare. Franziskus has worked for over 26 years in healthcare, and the majority of that time at Johnson & Johnson, and very recently launched his own consulting business. To give you some background, Franziskus holds a PhD in chemistry from the University of Hamburg, a dual degree MBA from INSEAD Singapore, and Tsinghua, Beijing, China, and has a Six Sigma green and black belt, and is also following education for board members. During that career, he's worked primarily in API manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, consumer health, and lately on a corporate level where he's helped to accelerate digital transformation. Franziskus, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here.
Great to have you. I should also say you'll be speaking about digital transformation at CDMO Live in May as well. So looking forward to having you there at the event.
Yeah, I'm excited to join that event. It was an interesting agenda and I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. It'd be great to talk about your career journey. And the majority of that's obviously at the world's largest healthcare company, J&J, and more latterly have launched your own consulting business. Let's talk about your career experience.
Okay, very good. No, thank you so much. So I really had a wonderful time and great experience at J&J, and I was able to learn so much across so many different areas. So I worked in R&D and also a lot of time in internal and external manufacturing, operations and quality and business development. And yeah, you mentioned that the last piece was one of the most exciting ones, driving the digital transformation at J&J for all of its quality organization across the entire sector, all the sectors, right? From a managerial aspect, I was mainly involved in driving change and progress of all kinds. So I frequently was involved in developing new strategies for the sector, for a group, for even the enterprise, and then bringing them to life. So I've built several new organizations, and then I drove many programs for performance improvement or culture change and so on. And then, as mentioned before, the advance in the digital transformation was a really exciting piece, the digital transformation and quality. Really cool. And I would say when we benchmarked, it was really, we had a lot of positive feedback from the outside. The quality strategy at J&J is probably seen as one of the most advanced in the industry, especially digital advancements were very good. And so, yeah, good time ahead there. And with regards to my ambition now, I left J&J by the end of the year, as you mentioned, and now start my own business. I really follow my own passion here. And, in J&J in total, I worked more than 10 years at the interface with CDMOs, suppliers, and so on. So that's where my passion really lies. And that's where I want to focus also my own business on working on how multinationals and suppliers and CDMOs and also tech vendors are working together.
So digital transformation in quality, that's clearly such an important area and something that you spent a long time working on. It'd be great to get your perspective on how you went about doing that. How do you create a new organization that can do that can accelerate digital transformation in quality? It'd be great to understand a bit more about the strategy that was behind that initiative, please.
Yeah, sure. Whenever you build change, so I can speak about that. I have done this many times, right? So digital is a little bit of a different animal to some extent because it's not limited to one function, right? But what's always the same is you start from a business view. What do I want to accomplish in my business? What is the objective eventually? What do I want to take the business for? Secondly, and that's specifically important for digital transformation, is consequently integrate with other functions and with your colleagues and so on. Limiting digital transformation to just one function isn't really wise, right? So I know that many companies start this way, especially the big ones have big groups and they're somewhat siloed. And you have a lot of work to just get your own group organized, right? But it doesn't work this way because at the end, for true digital transformation, you all fall back on the same data, on the same processes, and be it product data, supplier data, and so on, right? So that needs to be designed in a good way and needs to be accessible for everyone so that everybody can advance. I strongly advise for a model which is also known in the industry, like the digital core, digital operating model, right? And it's important to have like the design control at the center, but then allow the deployment also in the functions, in the groups, but following the same design principles, right? Execution can be decentralized, but design needs to be central. If you don't follow that, and that's I have seen many times as well, you have to redo a lot of things, a lot of throwaways and so on.
What kind of teams are involved in that? Because, quality touches and digital touches every single function. So how broad or how narrow does something like that need to be?
I think the silos, they often start, and we want to transform quality, right? But that's not enough, right? So the typical function you have at the table in a digital core model, for example, is like supply chain planning, R&D, sourcing, quality, operations, customer service, and so on. So all of these need to come together because for a customer service, you may need at a certain moment information from R&D, or you need information from quality or procurement and so on. So all of this needs to be designed in a way that any data can flow from anyone to anyone at a given time as you need it.
But it's a lot, isn't it? It's a lot to bring together all of those teams and get them all working together.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not about just automating and deploying like IT systems. It's a new way of doing business. If you follow like the Gartner curve, for example, which is a good supply chain model of being integrated, that's where you break through with your success, right? So when you are not working silo by silo, but you all work together and understand how the entire business works.
Yeah. And in terms of the data that everyone uses, is that consistent across the piece?
Yes, it has to be. You clearly see if one function starts cleansing the data just for their own function, it cannot be reused with another group. For example, procurement, quality, they may have different information about suppliers. And so supplier location, supplier names, address, all these kind of things, right? Product information. Everybody needs to fall back on the same, because otherwise you get very awkward outcomes, right? So you can get an analysis of something which doesn't make sense at all. Also from a talent perspective, maybe on how to design a team. I mean, for me, 3 criteria are important, like, of course, a good basis of technical skills for the area. I mean, that's a no-brainer. But then for me, the 2 most important aspects in a change team is first, a good business acumen, which really looks beyond your own function. So like beyond quality, for example. And I like taking a mix of people from outside, where also people from outside quality are joining, right? Because that broadens just the perspective. And then the other attribute, it's a personal attribute, it's like the hunger to change the status quo. You need to question the way we work. You need to think about how can we do it smarter in a different way. And then aspect like, of course, team spirit, but also collaboration, networking is very important, right? And then last piece, of course, is the alignment of the organization to, in my case, I decided to be aligned to the business priorities, so our strategic work streams, and then also to the sectors and the partners, with functional partners which you have. And then you still need to maintain a lot of connections with supply chain procurement and so on.
In order to get an initiative off the ground, presumably you would have to get board approval and sign off on certain types of KPIs. I mean, what would be the business rationale for a project like this? And are there particular KPIs which are more important than others to show the progress?
This is a great one. I would say oftentimes you start with strategy and then you measure the progress against the strategy. I think ultimately you need to come to going back to that aspect which I mentioned at the beginning, like you need to start from a business outcome, right? So what's the business outcome I want to achieve? And you define it, right? So it's not a hard this and that one is right. Like you can do like, I don't know, any KPIs you have normally quality. I would say you put up like, I want to bring this product to the market by this at that time. And then you need to get everyone aligned behind that. And if there is little means to get there, then those need to deliver the same results, right? Budget, of course, is something you want to look at, that you are not overspending your budget, these kind of things. But I would not say that you can I don't think you should put out KPIs which are specific to your progress in digital transformation. I think it should be business targets, and digital should deliver on the business targets. It's a business transformation. It's not a technology transformation.
The typical business KPIs, so the supply chain, about delivery, those types of KPIs, speed to market. So the standard business KPIs.
Yeah, for example, I've seen an example that was not in J&J, but there was someone saying, okay, we want to reduce the time for launch from 70 weeks to 7 weeks.
Hmm.
And then they brought everyone in the room and said, okay, what is your contribution to this? What do you need? And that's how they started off the digital transformation, right? It's a big multinational consumer company, but it's the business target was to get to the 7 weeks, that they did. And that brought them all together because they saw, well, the way we work in the labs and information goes from R&D and all this testing and so on doesn't work this way we used to do. So we have to change that. So the business objective was those 70 weeks to 7 weeks. The value in the market was calculated of how much more sales it would bring.
Mm-hmm.
And that was defining the budget you could spend on this. And very pragmatic approach. I really loved that example. But that was a KPI applying to everyone. And digital was leading in with their solutions to deliver on that target.
Interesting. I mean, would that be a good place to start, to have that sort of North Star that the whole organization's aligned with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really think the most important thing is to not look at digital transformation as a technology deployment. This is because you end up in looking at that as a cost factor or contributor to cost saving. This is not what digital transformation is. The transformation is you do a new way of doing your business, right? And it allows you to do things you were not able to do before, or make bigger jumps which were not possible before, like from the 70 weeks to 7 weeks, right? It's a true business transformation, and then digital needs to be. And then you need to understand some of the base principles, like the design criteria about data and systems and architecture and so on, because that is something you need to build for the long run, and that takes many, many years. But it is about transforming your business and not about technology.
Thank you. In your experience, and Franziskus, you talked about having a core team, a core transformation team, which can then work with all the functions, like a hub and spoke model.
Mm-hmm.
Who would you put within that transformation team? Because you've got people who obviously, have got a background, a specialism in IT systems on one hand, who've come in through that particular route into the business, and on the other, you've got people who maybe their education is in chemistry or biology, or who are working in the quality function. So potentially a mix of two quite different types of people, almost different cultures and languages. In your experience, what's the best mix of backgrounds and personalities to create a transformation team that can really work within pharma?
Yes, we're coming to this concept of being bilingual, right? So, first of all, I think from a personality perspective, you need to be someone who is really hungry to learn in both fields, in the technology field, but still also in the business field. And that can be like coming from each side, basically, right? It's important to understand, of course, how the business works. That's super critical because at the end, we are running a business, right? If you are in a quality function and are there to transform quality, you need to follow the principles of what is quality assurance for, right? But then the other hand is like you need your tech functions, like the data science team and IT teams. They need to help you to bring out that vision. What's the latest technology? How can I do this process completely differently, right? So you need those bilingual people who are able to think about the way we work in a totally different way. Does that answer a little bit your question? I mean, this is really about being comfortable with both worlds, and not just get stuck in one world and say, I do whatever my customer tells me in the IT department, and the other one, well, I'm not responsible for IT, right? So
it's an interesting concept, isn't it, being bilingual across those two different disciplines?
But that's where you see the biggest progress, right? So I know of plenty of examples of people who made that switch, and the jobs were outstanding in the progress because they looked at classical problems in a very different way, and that brought results to surface which were unthinkable before.
How do you recruit for that? Is there like a recruiting methodology or even questions you'd ask in interviews to try to see if they've got what it takes to be able to adapt themselves like that?
Yeah, very good. So you find more and more people who are going down that path. You find IT people, data science people who step over into a business function. I had people on my team, right, which were originally from IT, had made that switch to a business function before because they really wanted to do business, and but then looked at their way, their work in a very different way. So you find these people. Also the other way around, right? QA people who stepped into data science roles, who stepped into IT roles because they were passionate about the technology, but they still were thinking about like the business, like a QA engineer, right? So you find these people, but of course, also you find more people over time. It's increasing over time, but you can stimulate that also by offering that, right? Like we, for example, had a large training program, which was like a self-service program, and whoever had passion for this could do that. It was not mandatory. People jumped on this, they got certificates, and it was a self-service, which made them ready to run projects. You also can offer little projects. So we had in our team, we had people joining our team to conduct a project for their department, but under the guidance of the central team with all the digital means and so on. And then after 6 months, 9 months, they were back under the function, but had acquired another digital asset, basically, right? So you can stimulate that. I would dare to say the younger generation is much more open to make these jumps left and right. That's maybe a generational phenomenon as well. Not to follow the classical career path, but really go left and right and pick up. And things are changing so rapidly, you can never be just following a classical path.
When you think about the history of digital transformation, if you like, legacy companies being able to adapt and digitize, it's certainly full of as many failures as it is of successes. And a lot of the time it's big consultancy firms which might show up, great presentations, but then as soon as it hits the factory floor, it sort of stops. And indeed, I mean, you could say the same about quality. In certain cases, it can sometimes be hard for a quality function to influence what happens all the way through, certainly with something like digital. How do you go about convincing traditional leaders, perhaps in this example, quality leaders, to embrace digital transformation and really own it? Because I think that's part of the problem, is that without that sort of sense of ownership, the best initiatives can fall apart.
That's a great one as well. I think so. I was on a round table as well for digital quality, and we had the chance to talk to many other peers as well. And also apart from that, I was talking to how is it progressing. You always see great progress if the top leader makes it his own task, basically, to drive that change into a digital world, right? But it's at the end, it's still what I said before. It's about doing business, but in a different way. So that ownership, I mean, if you have a top leader who is more watching like, hey, how much time do I have left before I retire? Do I really need to do this change? I mean, then not a lot is going to happen, right? If you have someone who says, whoa, I look at the way we do business and I think this is really outdated from everything I experience every day around me, and I really want to change that, then that's where it starts. The next step then for a modern leader is really to so first envision the future on how to do business differently. That's always where it starts from. The second thing is, how do I make it work? And that means I need to understand the basic principles of like, how do I design this? Do I go for the short wins? Yes, I can do that, but I need to be confident that that's maybe a throwaway. What is the bigger architecture, the digital ecosystem you need to build in the background? And it needs to be one, like typical term is like the digital stack which you use, right? How is it designed? How do data and systems operate here that it goes for the long run? If I expect a senior leader, like I was myself, to really embrace that and understand, okay, I know the rules of the game now. If I want to go to that longer term vision, I need to follow certain principles. And to give an example, a typical thing which you see across the industry is that everybody is investing very, very heavily to replace the ERP systems, right? Or upgrade that, because many historically have many different ERP systems, different vendors, different instances, sometimes outdated and so on. But that's the backbone of all your digital transformation, right? It's a very heavy investment where you don't necessarily see immediate like return on invest. But if you don't do it, you will run into problems going forward. So the first one is the business vision. The second one is what's the architecture to run it on, and the base principle is free flow of data from any person in the supply chain or R&D and so on across to anyone else in the organization. Free access, free flow of data, and that's only possible if you follow certain basic principles on how you design your stack.
On the technology point, what in there are more important than others? Because technology stacks can be big and complicated and lots and lots of different systems. If there was just like one thing to get right, is that the ERP, would you say then, Franziskus?
I would say it's the ERP plus the major systems which you have. Like in manufacturing, it's the MES, the manufacturing execution system, like batch records, it's kind of things. In quality, it's the QMS, right? And in planning, they have a planning tool. So I have the backbone is the ERP where the business runs on, but then you have all the functional major applications, I would say, which all need to be synced very well. That's the basis, I would say. They all capture data, they produce data and so on, which you want to further process. So those data need to go from each of the systems, need to go in the middle part, which is like the data layer or data lake or however you want to call this. But there it needs to be organized very well. You need to have a data catalog. You need to know exactly which data come from where, how are they labeled, how are they being used. So you need to be very well organized around the data coming from the different systems. And it needs to be the same, like site names is a good example, right? So it's also your master data. How is it site called? And you find in reality that the name of one of your sites can be like 6, 7 different versions. Whether you ask an EHS person or a procurement person or supply chain person, they all have given different names. So that needs to be cleansed, and then it needs to be there. And then comes the fancy part where you get these deep insights. That's the analytical part. And that's on top of it. So that should draw from this data layer where the data is very well organized, but then you build all your fancy stuff, your analytical tools on top, which give you the deep insights and so on. You see, I think that when you, and I need to be careful what I say, but I think you see many systems provided, like QMS systems and so on. They all plug on like the ChatGPT and all these analytical functions and so on. I wonder whether you really need that. Because if you have simple systems to capture the base processes and base data, and then you have it in your digital stack, all the analytical part can happen on top of it. Do you need to buy a ChatGPT already in your QMS system, or is it enough if you run your analytical tools on top of your data stack, right? So that's a question a challenge I would put out there, but I don't want to get a conflict with the QMS vendors, so they will have the reasons why they offer that.
I think that's a very valid point. I mean, 90% of the work is in getting that data foundation right, doing the boring work, if you like, of having your data in the right taxonomy.
Yes, exactly.
How does that work with outsourced partners? I could see there's one model where you're doing that with your in-house facilities and getting everyone to use the same systems. Even then, for a big company built on acquisitions, there's still going to be lots of legacy systems and challenges there. How does that work best when your drug production manufacturing is working with various different contract manufacturers who are all operating on their own different systems? How does that pull into the ERP?
Yeah, if you look from the longer term value for the patient who eventually gets your medicine or whatever, why should it be different, right? So, I mean, think about how important supply chains are today in terms of getting integrated, right? So, in the past, you had total vertical integration, everything was happening in one company, and then now you outsource basically every piece. That creates a lot of interfaces, but that also creates a lot of hurdles, like handovers which need to happen. It introduced a lot of complexity where everybody's struggling to oversee on how a product flows, where's the labeling done, where's the packaging done, and so on, right? So I would strongly think that the biggest value for the customer at the end in terms of time and speed and cost and so on is if CDMOs also aim to push and integrate with their customers, right?
Mm.
And that means, for example, that and that's easier, by the way, if you go probably cloud-based and standardized data and so on. But I mean, you can have nowadays, you can have limbs to limbs integration from the limb system of your vendor to your supplier. You can integrate on the ERP platforms like inventory management and so on. So the more you integrate, the more value you eventually will create for the patient at the end, who is, I mean, we see every day we see this supply disruptions for whatever reason, right? I mean, to prevent this, the more you are integrated, the more you can prevent those kind of supply disruptions. And that's why I think this integration, it's the same as you have it internally. You need over time, you need to overcome these hurdles, and CDMO should aim to make it easier to integrate with their customers, and customers vice versa the same. They should not only go for customized solutions, but more maybe like the standard solutions, which are easy to integrate. You see technology evolving as well, that you can create more point-to-point integration between different systems and so on. But I think in principle, it's very critical that we get CDMOs closer in the value chain, closer integrated also from a technology perspective. It's the same principle. The more you integrate it, the more data can flow freely from one end to the other, the more value you will be able to create.
Completely agree. You've been involved with various benchmarking initiatives. How would you say that pharma compares to other industries in terms of digital adoption, pharma manufacturing in particular? Do you feel as though the industry is lagging behind? And if so, how can it step up? What's your take?
Yes, I would say pharma is probably a late mover.
Mhm.
And there's good reasons for that, right? So when I look to industries which I have seen outside of pharma, like the consumer business, automotives, semiconductors, and so on, I've seen wonderful examples. I would say, for tech industry is most advanced, but then even semiconductor industry is super well organized in the way they have their data and processes running, right? I
Mm.
would say engineering firms follow, like companies who are providing automation solutions, other technologies, and so on. And then automotive is very strong, also well integrated and also driven by customer demand. Like if you look into the information your car is collecting while you drive, and this
Mm.
information flowing back to the manufacturer and so on. Consumer goods,
All back to Elon Musk.
not only, I mean, I drive a BMW, and also my information, if I have an issue, my garage gets informed instantly
Mhm.
without me doing anything, right? So I like that. It's a good step forward value for the customer at the end, because it saves me time, and they can work on the solution. I would say then follows for me the consumer goods industry, and then pharma is coming after that in my point of view, but
Mhm.
I've seen fantastic progress there as well, right? There's reasons for that, and that's because as soon as you touch any like areas like which are product touching, like manufacturing quality, everything is very, very heavily regulated. So
Yeah.
nobody really wants to just jump and try out things, and if it doesn't work, then you do it better next time. That's not how the regulated industry works. I would say also probably like the airline industry will struggle with that. But I think you see big progress. I have seen excellent solutions in pharma, where, for example, manufacturing capacity by optimizing the process flow through your existing equipment. I know of one example, an external one, which was able to prevent a whole installation of a new manufacturing line, which is several $1 million, right? Just
Mm.
by optimizing the processes and better making utilization of your capacity, you could prevent building a new plant or a new manufacturing line, which costs a lot of money, but also a lot of time, right? So pharma is definitely catching up. And going forward, I think that pharma may be good in a spot to develop the most reliable solutions in terms of computer system validation, the most robust, the least mistakes, and so on, because it is so heavily regulated. But it requires also good collaboration with regulators to really validate systems and all this kind of good stuff.
Mm-mm. Every year, it feels like the pace is increasing, but certainly this year, AI is accelerating enormously,
Oh yeah.
driven by all of the big tech companies and huge amounts going on. Where that hits pharma, it feels like there's considerable anxiety about validating new technologies, whether that's chat GPT or all of the other LLMs that are out there and different technologies. How do you see that relationship between tech-driven innovation and compliance evolving?
Short answer is really that innovation needs to come, right? Because it will
Mm.
drastically improve the quality output, it will improve effectiveness, efficiency, and eventually the compliance levels, right? I really believe it should be in everyone's interest to make faster and better decisions. So this technology will absolutely enable it. If you look how quality departments and just any department works today, if they want to analyze a problem and how much time they spend on reading documents and collecting data, sometimes even manually and so on. This is kind of crazy if you see what's out there in terms of technology which is available. Of course, you cannot mess up on the way to get there, right? You cannot all of a sudden leave a product on the market which is not in a good standard or is harmful, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, we need to work through this, but all this technology has to come because it will change the world, right? It will change the pharma world. It has to happen.
What would you say the big opportunities from a quality perspective?
Well, let's take the example of an investigation. You have a deviation in manufacturing. Normally, what you see across the industry, you have like 30 days, sometimes 60, whatever, to do the investigation, right? Why does it take so long? Because people need to go back and review documents manually and so on. They maybe also need to do some lab testing that will not go away and so on. But if you look to the large language models and all the other AI tools which are there, you can analyze basically huge amount of data in a very, very short time, right? If you think like this next thing, which is coming, like the agents and so on, that's what a normal person is doing today to collect information in a manual way can be done in minutes with AI solutions, right? So why wait 30 days to conduct an investigation if you basically can have all the necessary information within 24 hours?
Massive time and cost efficiencies.
Yeah, but also think from the perspective, let's assume you find a mistake in operation. And there is product out of the market which is maybe not in good shape. Just think about how many people you can prevent from getting harmed by reacting faster, right? So that's where I think it's important to use all kind of technology. Also for launch of your product. Like if you launch a product and you see based on complaints which are coming in, you detect much earlier a signal that something is maybe not perfect with this product. You don't have to record it, but you maybe need to further optimize. The sooner you can start at this, the less scrap you have produced, the sooner you get, like in the consumer world, right? It's all about customer satisfaction. And so if you see that your product lacks certain attributes or has some weaknesses, which consumers' sentiments, they tell you they don't like it, right? You can immediately react before you have produced large volumes. And you may even secure your market share, right? Because if you have bad sentiments, people talk on social media about this, you will lose market share as well, right? So that's why I think it can really flip the coin whether something becomes a success or a failure or just a weakness and so on. And in the pharma world, for sure, it's all about safety and efficacy of medicines and so on, but it's the same principles, right? The sooner you know, the sooner you can act, and that can be very critical.
How important is that integration point that you mentioned earlier? So the integration with supply chains, planning, inventory, etc.
Very critical. I mean, for example, if we come to an issue, right, which we need to investigate in quality, you need information, you do root cause investigation where you basically need to find out which other batches can be impacted, right? Where's the bracketing, right? So you need information from supply chain. You need to understand maybe it's caused by a raw material coming from a supplier. You need to understand what is all of their back-end batches they produced and which other product maybe used the same material. Sometimes you have one raw material going into multiple of the different products. So you need to collect a lot of procurement data, supply chain data, but sometimes when you go into root cause investigation, you need R&D data as well. You need manufacturing data. So an incident investigation is, I think, is a great example of where you need to have instant access to all this kind of information to really come to a very quick solution or a conclusion.
Thank you. Franziskus, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing so much wisdom about how to make this work. We talked about how 2025 is accelerating from a technology point of view, but for you personally, it's been a year of transition as well, I suppose, about going to be independent and set up your own business. So it'd be great to understand a bit more about what that looks like for you and where you see there being opportunities to help companies.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's exciting for me. I mean, it was a big step, of course, to leave J&J after 26 years. I had a wonderful time there, but it was also time to do something else and not to start a new chapter there. That was my conscious decision not to do that. And I always wanted to start my own business, and I have learned so much. Now I want to see what's it worth, right? So is anyone interested in that? And I did a lot of work to set up my own offering. What could be a good service offering which I can provide? So I'm testing with friends, and as you do, right, when you start up your own business, but also with suppliers. And there were many reaching out actually and saying, hey, what's next for you? And so I go a little bit also where the demand comes, and I'm up on those kind of projects which go in a similar direction, like either redesigning organizations or just being an advisory role, like helping suppliers to work with multinationals in a different way. And then the other thing which is maybe interesting is really in the Swiss market, where I also want to focus more. I was very much internationally, but now I want to focus more on the Swiss market. And you see here that the mid-sized companies are all struggling in their board of directors with geopolitical risk, of course, more than ever, but also digital transformation is the other topic. So I'm getting prepared. I do my education for board of directors and do some advisory roles already on board level, but maybe even step into a board position if there is a demand, if there is an ask. That's what I'm offering. So this year, it's all about transition. My passion is still the same. I'm still passionate about transforming healthcare, and whatever I can contribute, I will do so.
One final question for you. If there was just like one piece of advice which you would share, and whether that's a biotech or a medium-sized large pharma company, one piece of advice for them to get better results on this transformation journey, what would that be?
Get out of your silo, get bilingual, expose yourself, but keep the business in mind as the North Star. It's about the business. It's not about the digital transformation. The silos is really stepping out of the silo, even as a CDMO, work with your multinationals. Ideally, you have a partnership where you cannot tell if you work on a problem, who is the customer, who is the vendor. If you work this way, then you are fully integrated.
Franziskus, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking to you today and looking forward to you joining us in Rotterdam for CDMO Live.
I'm looking forward to that as well. Thank you so much for inviting me there as well.
Experience the future of contract manufacturing at CDMO Live 2025. Join us at the World Trade Centre Rotterdam on May the 7th and 8th, 2025 for an exclusive event that brings together the sharpest minds in biopharma outsourcing. For 2 days filled with market insights, best practices and partnering. So head to cdmolive.com to download the agenda and to book your ticket.